Putting in content. Let's put some content into our work so far. I did a bit of research and I found out more about the client. How did I do that? I used his own personal pictures that were attached to the brief in Google's image search, and I found out another site of his. If you don't know how to do that, let me show you. Open up Google and write Google Image Search, or simply use this. Then click on the camera icon. Then select the second tab that says Upload an image. Select one and Google will show you where else you can find that image. We can see we're taken to this site. And here we immediately get two other websites, Sing Utah and singamazingly.com. The first one has a menu item called Certified Voice Instructors, and you can click on Chuck Gilmore's name to read more about him. I've already selected bits and pieces from these two sites, so I won't waste any more time with it. Just know I did my research thoroughly. Okay, back to the site. The first thing we need to set up is the main menu. Let's jump back to the brief so we can see what he wants. We need to focus on page descriptions. Okay, we're obviously going to start with Home. I like to use a notepad for my initial menu and then paste it into Photoshop. It helps me focus on the task by not alt-tabbing constantly. I think the next one should be Blog instead of Learning Center because of our layout choice. I'll mention to the client that this layout will sell more, but his users will still be able to access his blog easily by putting it as the second menu item. Learning Center is going to be our third item. Then Work With Me, which is described as page 4 in the brief. Then About Me. I consider this less important, thus the fifth position. Lastly, we'll have Products and Contact. Products because he's unsure of it, and Contact because that's usually last. So let's paste this menu inside our project. I'm not sure this is going to fit next to our logo, and he mentioned he wants a pretty clear navigation. I think I might put it underneath the logo in a separate area. So I'll duplicate the initial header layer, shrink it, and change its color. No need to adjust anything as we're still working on our elaborated wireframe, if you will. Next, we're going to put something in our hero area. Like I said, I already did my research and I think Power to Sing is a pretty decent headline. It's not the best, but it beats Lorem Ipsum any day. If you think you can come up with a slogan or with a short sentence that encapsulates the website's message, make sure you include it. I think it's much better you create something of your own than simply putting dummy text or taking stuff off his older websites. Since this is quite short, we're going to add a subheadline. Professional online singing lessons seems pretty good at this point. Underneath these two, we will surely have a call to action button, something like sign up or get started. If you press T and you see your cursor has a round circle, then you're going to write inside the rectangle you just added. You'll need to either go outside the shape and you'll see your cursor will become a square, or you can use Ctrl-Shift-H to hide those points and then you can write it in. I'll type in get started. So at this point things are going pretty well and the design flows naturally. There's nothing too complex or difficult about it, nor do we need to overthink things. Let's add the logo as well. We'll use one of the PNGs the client provided. No reason at this point to jump into Illustrator. I'll use Power to Sing PNG, the one without the white background. Resize it and put it somewhere in the top left. And since we've gone to the header, let's put in a phone number to the right so we can balance this section out. 801-298-7464. This was taken from one of those two sites I previously showed you. It's a bit risky to use them because we're not sure if they're still up to date, but it's better to use a real one than simply writing in random numbers, especially if you're not from that area and you don't know the phone number format. That's about it regarding the hero area. We might add more content once we put in a picture and see how things look. For the first content area, I've decided to go with some general information about the website. The first headline is going to be Private Singing Lessons, and the subheadline is going to be Learn to Sing Higher with Greater Strength, Ease and Confidence. This is what I came up with after going through everything. Underneath, we'll probably have a few lines of text, so I'll just use Lorem Ipsum at this point. Go to Type, paste Lorem Ipsum to get it. How did I decide to go this route? Well, the hero area doesn't contain enough information about the service Chuck is providing, so it seems fitting that we further describe how he can improve your singing. For the next region, we'll use the exact same format in order to maintain consistency. So we'll use the same font style, same colours, and same spacings. Of course, that's going to be later down the road, so at this point simply select these 3 layers and drag a copy down by holding the Alt key. The first line is going to be Learn from a Professional. The subheadline is going to read, Chuck Gilmore has over 15 years experience in the singing field. This is a section where I present the teacher, and I think it's a must-have for this type of website. I thought about it a lot whether to put this as the very first section, but considering everything, I decided I needed to further clarify the goal of the website to the user. When a visitor comes in, he'll see the hero section, of course, but if he looks down just a little, he'll read yet again the main angle of the website, private singing lessons. Lastly, we'll have a testimonial section. Technique of the stars for you. And thousands have improved their singing through us, find out their opinion. Just a bit of text I came up with. And underneath that, we'll have some quotes from former students and most likely an image. For the footer, I won't paste in any content because I like to leave that for last after I get to analyse the design until that point. Creating the header. Now that we have a bit of structure and some content, we're going to start refining things, starting from the top and going all the way to the bottom. The first on your list is the header section, and this will hold our logo, phone number, and main menu. Okay, let's enlarge our background layer so we'll have sufficient room for our elements. I'll call this layer BG, short for background, and I'll resize it to 120 pixels in height. I'll move the menu underneath it and call that BG as well. Why the same? Well, both are backgrounds, and since they'll stand in separate folders, that won't be a problem. So right now we have to decide what colour scheme we should go for because things are getting serious. Since he has red in his logo, I'll go with that based on the fact that I presume he likes it, even though it's quite dated. So red it is. I won't go for a pure flat colour or a gradient. Instead, I want something a bit more interesting, so for that, I'm going to look for an image. We're going to actually use 2 images, one on top of each other with a Gaussian blur applied. And on top of that, we'll have a hue and saturation layer. Why this route? Because it's going to give us more detail in the header. These are the 2 images I'm going to use, and they're from unsplash.com. I'm going to drag them inside the project and make sure they're the right size. Apply a clipping mask with Ctrl-Alt-G, and the images should now be visible only in the area of the first BG layer. You can hide the second image for now. Next, I'll apply a very generous Gaussian blur. 78 pixels in this case. Repeat the process with Ctrl-F while having the second layer selected and active. Okay, I know this doesn't seem to be heading in the right direction, but after we change the blending mode of the second layer to lighten, things are going to improve. Let's add the adjustment layer as well, since we decided we're going to use red as the main colour. Go to this little icon and select Hue and Saturation. The values are 354 for hue, 86 for saturation, and 23 for lightness, with the Colorize option being checked. Now we're going somewhere. Of course, the images should be repositioned until you're happy with the end result. Using this technique, it's quite hard to get the same result twice, but if you fiddle around with it, you should end up with something like this. We have several red nuances here and there, and the entire element seems that more interesting in my opinion. After you're 100% certain this looks right to you, select the 2 images and the adjustment layer and merge them with Ctrl-E. You could even merge them with the background layer if you like, it's the same thing. I like to keep the layers panel clean, but still give me some flexibility. So if I'm still not sure about it, I can simply move the image up or down to adjust it even more. Okay, looking pretty good. One last thing before we finish up this background element is a pattern overlay. I'm going to use the Subtle Patterns extension that's in my Photoshop. This is a paid extension and it has every single entry that's up on subtlepatterns.com. It's fairly cheap and I consider it a good addition to my workflow. If you don't have it, don't worry, you can simply go to their website and download any pattern manually. After you've selected one, open it in Photoshop. Make sure it's the only layer in that project and it doesn't have any excess space around it. If that's the case, use this feature, Image Trim. Okay, next go to Edit, define pattern, put in a name, and you're good to go. Right, going back to our project, I'm going to select one of those patterns to give me some extra details. Choose one at random, but then make sure you change the blending mode to multiply. Now this is something that needs to be played around with. Depending on your images and how light your red is, some patterns might work better than others. If you zoom in a bit more, you'll see the pattern better. The resolution you're viewing this video in will influence things quite a lot. The goal here is to get something that's subtle, yet visible. To spare some time, I'm going to do it like they do it in those cooking shows. I already have one pre-made, so let me grab that out of the oven and show it to you. Again, I've used the very same techniques I've described, I just spent another 10 or 15 minutes on it, so I hope you'll be okay with me leaving those parts out. Okay, now the logo is in various forms attached to our brief. Trouble is, all versions are quite dated and look mediocre, so what I'm going to do is update the logo to better fit our project. This is risky, yes, because the client may have this logo already printed on business cards, t-shirts and so on. Yet this style is clearly old and must be freshened up. It's a two-way street. He may hate the fact that you've adjusted his logo, or he may appreciate the initiative and/or the outcome. So that's the reasoning behind my decision. Okay, first thing, let's resize it to about 20% of its size. Since it's a smart object, it's actually bigger than you initially think. Open up your guides and position it correctly on the left side of the site. And then use the marquee tool to create a selection that spans the entire height of the background layer. Then press V and your alignment tools will become available. Align it vertically and we're good. Next, we're going to do the risky stuff. Access the Layers Styles panel and choose Color Overlay. We're going to make it white. This is a much better fit for our header, but we're not done yet. We'll add one last final touch to it. Zoom in really close and get your magic wand tool. Hotkey is W. With a tolerance of around 40, make a selection of that bird that's on top of the W letter. Then press Ctrl J to duplicate it. Finally, open up Color Overlay and change it to FFE400. This is a nice golden yellow I've decided will work great. There's no real magic behind it, there are very few colours that work well on top of red, so my decision wasn't very difficult. Zoom out and take a look at our progress so far. I'm quite happy with it. For the phone number, we'll create an element that'll hold it. We'll start with the rounded rectangle tool. Set the radius at 10 pixels. This is going to be the roundness I'll use through the entire design. Why 10? Well, square is a bit out of style, 5 is kind of close to it, and sometimes it's hard to tell it's not completely square, and 15 is a bit too friendly. I want something balanced between professional and cold and a warm personal website. Okay, so let's create a shape that's fairly wide and short that will hold our number. After you're happy with it, we'll get the ellipse tool. Here we'll draw a circle at the left of our rectangle that will hold a nice phone icon. Make sure you align both these shapes, then merge them together. We're going to use pure white because it gives us maximum contrast. The icon will be from flaticon.com. Search for phone and you'll get a bunch of results. I'm going to use this particular one since I like how it looks. Instead of downloading it as a PNG file, I prefer to get it as a PSD since it will be a shape layer, thus giving me a perfectly crisp icon. Please note that this download will require attribution, so if the client decides to use my design, he'll have to mention somewhere that he got this icon from flaticon.com. That's not a huge deal, but if you want to avoid it, you'll have to spend a bit of time searching for icons that don't require any credits. Okay, with the icon now opened in Photoshop, we'll drag it into our project. I don't like it in black, so I'll double-click its thumbnail to make it white. Of course, it's not going to work with our current element, so we'll get the ellipse tool again and create another circle inside of the first one. We'll leave around 3 to 5 pixels so the initial circle will act as a stroke. The inside one should be a saturated red. I'll use D61920. Now the icon goes great inside it. Make sure you align it and adjust the size if needed. In all cases, you need to leave a bit of empty space around your icon or text that's inside a button or an element like this. Don't crowd things. You're not making designs for blind people. Smaller elements are more elegant, and you don't have to fear people missing them. Okay, lastly, we'll adjust the client's phone number, 801-298-7464. I'll go with the sans serif font, even though the logo appears to have some decorative elements to it. I'll probably do a combination of fonts to balance things out. So my sans serif font of choice is Montserrat, and in this case I'll have it in bold. Size 20 pixels, and the colour will be 333, which is a light black or a dark grey, however you want to look at it. Again, make sure you align everything perfectly so we don't have any unaesthetic gaps. Like I previously said, alignment and proper spacing are essential to any website design. Okay, this looks great and we're heading towards the right direction. Having an element here in this right side gives the header area more balance. Logo on the left, phone on the right. For the menu, we'll resize it to around 50 pixels height-wise. For the colour, I'll use red again. D51920 is my choice. I've tried other combinations, but this was the best one. Remember, the client said he wanted a very clear navigation. If we used yellow, white or black, it may have stood out more, but it would have looked terrible. This way we're keeping inside our colour scheme, and we're increasing the awareness towards the brand colour. The menu items will use Montserrat Regular, 15 pixels in all caps. Align it vertically to your BG layer and place it here so home touches the outer left guide. Make sure you have the same amount of space between each element. Initially, press space a few times and eyeball the distance. Then zoom in and copy the first space, and then paste it for each 2 menu items. It's a trial and error process, so after you've done it once, you can then remove or add spaces. If you're not way off, just count how many times you press space or backspace. This way you don't have to copy-paste again. Use your guides to help you through the process and be patient. And keep in mind that the home button will have a down state. Let's do that before we carry on with our adjustments. Measure the distance between home and blog. Cut that into half, and that's the amount of space you need to leave on the left side of the first menu item. It's not final, but it's a start. I like to use Shift to reposition things, and then I constantly go back to the marquee tool to measure things out. Draw a rectangle and make sure it's perfectly centered. The color I'll go for is C51016. Then let's add a satin effect to further showcase this button is pressed. Satin should be at an angle of 0 degrees without invert turned on. Opacity should be 50%, distance 5 pixels, and size 40 pixels. I could have used an inner shadow, but I'd rather show an alternative to it. This is our progress so far. The menu doesn't fit perfectly our 960 width, and we also have an aesthetics issue with the space between blog and learning centre. The space is considerably bigger than what we get between blog and home. They are in fact equal, but due to the down state, it tricks us into thinking something's not right. So we need to adjust the menu further. This will screw up our initial measurement, but that's to be expected. Again, take your time and don't rush to the next section because these things really matter. To further improve the menu, we will add separators between each 2 menu items. This was not in my original plan, but after executing the menu so far, it seems appropriate. I'll also increase the tracking or letter spacing to 5. This will help us position it correctly and it will look just a bit better. For the dividers, we'll use the line tool with a weight set at 1 pixel. The colour should be black and the opacity should be taken down to 20%. Use the marquee tool to measure everything again. Keep in mind the last menu item will have a divider to its right, so we need to leave some room back there. After your first divider is done, duplicate it with Alt-Shift-Drag and center it with the help of the Marquee tool. Quite repetitive work, and if things don't line up correctly at the end of contact, we might have to do it again. This is why speed is so important. Okay, this is how the menu should look at the end of our intense back and forth session. I'm happy with it, it's near pixel perfect, with only 1 pixel plus or minus. If this wasn't recorded, I'd probably spend another 5 or 10 minutes on it to make sure it's absolutely perfect, but we have to keep things rolling. There's one last thing I'd like to add to the header, and this is branding reasons. It's a quote I got from a random website, and it says, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." This acts like a motto, a slogan, or just some food for thought for students who are struggling with their singing. To make this text nicer, we're going to use a script typeface. I'm going to use Dancing Script Bold because it's easy to read and it's not that pretentious. Size 26 pixels, white for the top row and yellow for the one underneath. This ties everything together and makes the header look great. I haven't mentioned it so far, and I probably won't talk about it too much, but you have to constantly adjust your layers panel in order to keep everything in check. It's up to you if you like to stop every 2 to 3 layers and do it, or rename and group everything at the end of the section. What's certain is, you have to keep it clean. Great, this concludes the header section. Creating the hero area. We've made a nice header for this project, now it's time to move down to the hero section. The first thing we want to do is to select an image from the Pack the Client attached to this contest. As you browse through these, we can see we don't have a lot of choices. The vertical or portrait ones are out from the start. Even if we wanted to use them, the fact is some are skewed to make them very difficult to use in a hero section. So we've narrowed it down to a few options, the landscape ones, but even those aren't all appropriate. The only good one is this black and white image in a train station because the first 2 are way too close in. We don't want a huge face in our hero section, so those are out as well. The last image is kind of small as well as somewhat inappropriate, I feel, for this particular area. So for all those reasons, we're going to use this image. Jump into Photoshop and use Ctrl-Click to identify your background layer for that section. Then drag and drop the image above it and use Ctrl-Alt-G to make a clipping mask. Of course, we'll need to reposition it and even resize it. I have to say I love the new upscaling engine. It does a great job enlarging images without losing too much quality. So this is how our picture looks so far. I'm not keen on its size, so I'll enlarge the background layer so that we can see more of our picture. 550 is pretty good. By the way, if you want to switch from percent to pixels, just right-click and choose pixels. This is a bit better. That metal thing he's leaning against isn't doing us any favours. Plus, I'd like to keep my headline and subheadline in the left side of the screen, so for those reasons, we'll flip the image horizontally. And now this gives us a much better option for our text. Let's focus on that. Power to Sing isn't an amazing headline. I think I could have thought of something better, but let's go with it anyway. For its formatting, I'll go with Montserrat Black, 65 pixels, and I'll condense it a bit with a tracking of -40. I'll also have it in all caps. Align it with the help of our guides. This is big and powerful, no apologies about it, yet it still doesn't have great legibility because of the background. We'll do 2 things for that. First, we're going to add a curves adjustment layer. Bring the top part down a bit so the whole thing becomes darker. This obviously affects Chuck and we don't want that, so get a brush, make it big, preferably something soft. Select the adjustment layer and start painting with black. This eliminates the curves effect in the particular area we're painting over. We're going to focus on him, of course, but we can also extend this action to the right where we already have a dark area because of that pole metal thing. So this was the first step. The second thing we're going to do is add a drop shadow to our text. Open up the Layer Styles dialog box and let's adjust our settings. Disable global lighting and set the angle at 90 degrees and lower the distance to 1 pixel. That's fine with me. Reposition the text if you feel that's needed. For our sub-headline, we're going to use the following settings. I'm going to go with a serif font to bring something new to the design. Museo Slab 500 is a great modern serif font. Size 24 pixels, color white, of course, in all caps. Align it with our headline and paste the drop shadow layer style. We want this bit of text to span the exact width of the headline. So zoom in and use your guides or your grids to adjust the text. Use a negative tracking to condense it rather than using Ctrl-T. Start with -10 and work your way into the perfect fit. Drag another guide to check and see if it's aligned, but don't let go of it since we don't want it permanently there. It seems -20 gives us the best result, so we'll go with that. Distance-wise, I think 20 pixels is enough room between the two text layers. Alright, looking good. Let's focus on the Call to Action button next. Position it to the left of the active content area and leave 20 pixels space between it and the sub-headline. For the color, we'll go with red. E4 1B22 is the color code. For the text inside, we'll go with Get Started, and that's going to be in all caps too. We'll use Montserrat Bold 24 pixels. No drop shadow, nothing else. Add a second line of text saying, "Decide to succeed today." This is in line with the top quote, and it's all about getting people motivated to sign up and get going with these lessons. It's not something the client asked for directly, but for this type of website we have to use our knowledge and add elements that will help conversions. That means transforming visitors into paying customers. For the formatting, we'll use Museo Slab 700, so something a bit bolder with the same yellow as before, FFE400. Align everything, make sure it's pixel perfect. Group the two text layers and then align them with the background. If your button doesn't have enough width, resize it. Always leave some breathing room to create a better visual display. I don't like to approximate things when we have tools and techniques that help us get the perfect result without issues, so you shouldn't settle for less either. Okay, we're almost done with this section. Take a moment and rename some layers if needed. Okay, let's see what's next. The client told us both directly and indirectly that he wants to capture visitors' emails. At this point, I have to say I'm not sure if that's a separate thing from the Get Started button. It may be something completely different, but we can't stop our design process and ask the client because that takes at least several hours. Keep in mind, clients are not glued to their computer, so we're going to take it a step further and add another area especially made for capturing clients' email addresses. Get the rectangle tool and draw one that spans the entire width of the screen. Make it black and lower the opacity to 60%. Height should be around 60 to 70 pixels. Also add a stroke effect. This will separate the area further. 1 pixel outside with an opacity of 40%. The color should be white. This area will be similar to those we saw in the upper region of those inspirational websites. So we have to make it quite compelling. Add some text saying, "Get my starter course valued at $99 for free." This is something I came up with and it can be adjusted to fit his needs. Right now we're working on the initial concept. The font is going to be Montserrat Regular, 18 pixels with a tracking of -20. Make it white except for the last two words, which should be yellow. Also change the font weight to black so it really stands out. Align it to the left and center it vertically. Now we're going to create two input fields. These should be made with the rounded rectangle with the same radius, 10 pixels. These can't be too wide because we don't have a lot of space. We'll go with 160 by 40 pixels. Inside we'll write your name with Montserrat 14 pixels. The color should be 333. Duplicate it and write your email for the second one. Of course, group and align as usual. We also need a call to action button here, so we'll duplicate one of these rectangles and move it to the side. 10 pixel spacing, as was the case between the two fields. This one should be narrower, so drop it to 140 and make it red. E4 1B22 is the exact color code. It's the one we've previously used. Right inside it, download with Montserrat Bold 16 pixels in all caps. This is looking quite good, but we're not there yet. This needs a bit more love. We're going to write, become the best you can be, don't hesitate, above these two fields, and we're going to add a line that's pointing down. This is so we draw the user's attention to this area. OK, for the text we'll be using Dancing Script Bold, as was the case up in the header. Size 30 pixels is just fine. We'll position it over his shirt because it gives us great contrast. For the line, I've browsed my brush gallery quite a lot and finally decided on this one. There's a bunch of sites that offer these arrows in various formats, either brushes or custom shapes. Just Google Arrow Photoshop and you're sure to get lots of results. Make it red and position it so it points towards the email field. Make sure everything is spot on, perfectly aligned and organized in the Layers panel. And we're good to go. We've covered around a third of the website so far, and I think we're heading in the right direction. The website has character, personality, it focuses on selling while still having a personal touch with all the quotes and the teacher's image. Overall, I'm happy with it. Let's continue to the next section. Creating the content area. The progress so far is great, but we now need to focus a bit on USP, that's unique selling points. So we've established several channels through which the site can convert. It's either the telephone number, the Get Started button, or filling out the small form. That's great, but now we need to give people a reason to do so. The main problem with a blogging layout is you take away a lot of call to action and you're diluting your strong selling points. So for that reason, I'm going to stick to a design that's more close to a landing page rather than what the client asked for through his inspirational websites. So here's how we're going to start. We're going to use a headline, a subheadline, and a bit of text. This is going to cover two areas, and then we'll have a testimonial region and the footer. So we'll keep it relatively short and sweet, and we'll try to synthesize the main points on why you should sign up, call, or get started. I'd like to mention again that I'm putting myself in a position where I'm trying to understand both sides. A, to be the teacher who wants to convert and make money. B, the student who wants to be convinced to choose this quote-unquote product. With that in mind, the content you'll see is something I gathered from the websites you previously saw. As you recall, I did a Google image search from the teacher's image and found some other older sites that featured him. I'm stressing this aspect because a lot of times you won't get any good material in the brief. It's up to you to be smart and make it happen. You have to be creative. You have to put yourself in that position where you get to make it happen no matter what. Okay, enough talk, let's do it. The main headline is going to be private singing lessons. The formatting is Montserrat Bold, 36 pixels in all caps, color 333. By the way, this is going to be the color for all black text, so I'll probably stop mentioning that. The subheadline is Learn to sing higher with greater strength, ease and confidence. This is Museo Slab 300, 26, this time without the all caps. The headline should be around 50 pixels underneath the hero area. We have to make it airy, so 50 is a pretty reasonable number. Between the two, we'll leave 20 pixels. For the background, we're going to have 3 sections in total, so we'll alternate colours. Get the rectangle tool and draw something that spans the entire width of the canvas, and with a height of around 550 pixels. For the colour, we'll use F5, F5, EF, which is a grey, cream, beige colour depending on what monitor you're looking at. We're going to use this in the first and third section, so it will alternate nicely. For the actual content, we'll do the following for this region. We're going to make a simple custom graphic. We can't afford to spend a couple of hours on something complex, plus an intricate illustration wouldn't work great considering our image in the hero section. Nevertheless, we're going to make something nice. Start with the ellipse tool. Click once and create a 290 by 290 circle. Make it the same red as the call to action buttons. This is not ideal because we should distinguish the action colour from a background colour, yet after trying several versions, this is the one that looked best. So it's an assumed risk, if you will. I don't recommend you do it too often. Inside the circle, we have to put something music related. The most appropriate thing I could think of is a microphone with some musical notes around it. Jump over to flaticon.com and search for microphone. Scroll down and this is the one I want. Drag it over to our project and enlarge it. Also make sure you change its colour to white. Then go back to flaticon.com and search for music. This will give us a musical note icon which we will place inside the circle somewhere around the microphone. Make it white and duplicate it a few times. Make smaller versions and position them as you see fit. 4 icons should be enough, 2 on each side, 1 big and 1 small. That seems about right. Take your time with it, don't rush to get it done. To finish it off, we're going to create a nice long shadow. The process is fairly complicated to do manually, so we'll use this plugin you can find online. It's called Long Shadow Generator 2. Get the mic icon and background layer and move them to another tab. This will make it easier to generate. Then use the default settings of 50 pixels, 20%, black and flat. Hit Generate, and there you go, you've got yourself a long shadow. It's missing the fadeaway, most likely because of a Photoshop upgrade that just happened recently, but no worries, we'll do it ourselves with a mask. Press the Layer Mask button at the bottom of the Layers panel. Then get the Gradient tool while having your black and white as the foreground and background colours. Now swipe a few times until you get the perfect result. It usually takes a few tries until you get close to what you want. I have to mention this wasn't a must-have. We could have easily left it out considering we don't have any other long shadows in the design, but I decided to show you how you can create something in only a few steps that still looks nice. So that's our custom graphic for this section. To its right, we'll have some content I've already prepared. I'll paste it in and we can start formatting it. Montserrat bold, 18 pixels size, 30 pixels line height or leading. Make sure you have 2.5 lines because this looks best. Of course, we couldn't use all caps because that would look terrible. That may be appropriate for buttons and titles, but for body content that's not ideal. Underneath this text we'll have some bullet points. This is all part of those unique selling points I was talking about. This is strong, concentrated content aimed towards convincing the user that this is the right site for him. A blog inevitably stretches out that content. This layer should be in Montserrat Regular 14 with 28 pixels leading. Group these two together and center it vertically with the microphone graphic. Then of course ungroup it. If you're not sure why I'm constantly doing this, recheck the Alignment Tools video. There I explain it in detail. Okay, to improve this area we're going to use the icon that's in the logo. Luckily for us we have the vector file so we can easily jump to Illustrator and grab it from there. We're going to import it as a custom shape, so it maintains its vector properties and we'll change its opacity to a mere 5%. We don't want it too obvious, we want it as a nice subtle touch. One last step is to duplicate the call to action from the hero area and move it into the center of the screen. Align it horizontally with the alignment tools up top, and for the area underneath you can zoom in really close and select 2 pixels, one tan and one white. Then hit Align Vertical Centers. Now we can continue with our second area. This will have a pure white background, so there's no need for a new layer. Instead, let's copy the 4 text layers because we're going to reuse them. Move them so the headline will be 50 pixels away from the call to action. Now change the headline to Learn from a Professional and Chuck Gilmore has over 15 years experience in the singing field. This is geared towards selling and creating a personal image for the teacher. We'll move the body content to the left because I want to have a graphic over on the right side. I prefer to alternate from left to right. It's a small thing that makes a world of difference. Paste some text instead of what we previously had. This is a prime example where it pays to do your research and not use dummy text. It would have dialed down the impact of the design quite a lot. We'll put in some bullet points, making sure everything is nice and aesthetic. For the graphic on the right side, we'll use the same circle size of 290 by 290. It should be white and should have a grey stroke. 1 pixel in size, position outside, color CB, CB, CB. Duplicate it and shrink it just a few pixels. We want to have 3 to 5 pixels empty space. You can clear the stroke if you want to, that's optional. Since this is about the teacher, we'll surely use one of his images. This one seems appropriate, so we'll go with that. Make it fit right and don't be afraid to distort it ever so slightly so it'll look better. One thing I like to do for portraits, and it's dead easy to do, is get a vibrance adjustment layer. Turn up the vibrance to 80 and the skin will look much better. One last thing to do to further improve it is to add a satin effect to our inner circle. Go to Satin, Angle 0 degrees, Opacity 50%, Distance 7 pixels, Size 70 pixels. These are small details that add up. We're looking great so far. Let's see what else we have on our list. The teacher had a pretty extensive bio and it seems fitting to place it here in this section. That can be a USP too because it shows the teacher's expertise. So duplicate the circle and make it smaller. 200 by 200 seems fine. Now replace the image with the one where he's on stage performing. Put this to the left side of the website. As for the text, I've selected 2 paragraphs that I thought were relevant. First, put in the title Short Biography. This should have the same formatting as the bold text up top. So, Montserrat bold, 18 pixels. The actual content is this. Paste it in, and it should be Montserrat regular, 13 pixels, with 23 pixel leading. Again, take your time to make sure everything is set up right. We need to have everything aligned and pixel perfect. Grouping several text layers and aligning them with images or graphics is a nice way to show attention to detail. Finally, make a copy of the Call to Action button and place it underneath this section. Again, 50 pixels is the way to go. This concludes the content area. Next, we're going to create the testimonial section and footer, thus wrapping everything up. Creating the testimonial and footer areas. The testimonial section is the final element that brings it home. The user sees all the points, he gets a nice impression. Now all that's left is for him to read some reviews. This is the thing that drives the person to take immediate action. So for that reason, I decided to include it in the site. I didn't put it above the other sections because I first needed to present the service, then the teacher and his expertise, and only now it makes sense that we show off what other people are saying about this service. For this section, we're going to continue our line. We're going to start off with a rectangle with that particular color we chose earlier. We can make a duplicate and save ourselves some time. We need to align it to the center of the button. To find out where exactly is that center, we can first roughly position the background layer. Then select the button, or actually the background layer of it, and drag out a horizontal guide. When you try to place it, it will stick to the exact center, so we don't have to measure it to position the background perfectly. Moving down, we need the same 50 pixel, then the headline and subheadline. Let's put in the actual text, Technique of the Stars, for you, and thousands have improved their singing through us, find out their opinion. And these are formatted in the same way across the site. A testimonial section without images doesn't live up to its full potential. So for that reason, we'll duplicate this circle here, but we'll make it a bit smaller so it will fit better. Regarding the image, this is where you can use anything from the web. I don't recommend you use watermarked images though, because in this particular place it's clear this is just a dummy image. Position it to the left side of the site and resize it again if you feel it's not right. For the quote, I've actually copied something from the older website. Let me paste that in. Here I want to use Museo Slab 300 with 18 pixel size and 30 pixels leading, because it looks more appropriate for a quote. We could also use italic. That looks good as well, but I think I prefer the regular version. Centering it would also improve it, so let's do that too. Of course, we have to realign it. Add a fake name and city underneath. This is going to be Museo Slab 700, so it stands out a bit, but we'll keep it at the same size. I will also create some points underneath because this should be a slider. I'm going to make the first bullet point red, and then for the rest I'll use a light grey. BEBEBE is my colour of choice. All these should be renamed and grouped. Then you need to align it with the text up top. Of course, you can go the other way around with the colour scheme here. You can have the inactive points in the action colour, but I prefer it this way even though it's not consistent with the rest of the design. I've made some compromises here and there, but I am fully aware of them. Finally, I want to stress that this is a slider, so I'll add 2 arrows on either side of the name and bullet points. I got these from a pack on the web, just small shortcuts that aren't particularly interesting. Remember, Google is your friend. For them, I'll use a dark grey, 363636. And now this area is almost completed. One last thing I want to do is add some nice touches to the background. These are some icons I got from flaticon.com, and I'm going to place them to the left and right of this content. The opacity should be fairly low, similar to what we've used up top, 5%. I'll make some smaller and some bigger. I'll put 3 on each side, but in no particular order. I like to make it clear when things are supposed to line up and follow a pattern, and when they're specifically thrown on the canvas. This is looking pretty good. Okay, overall I'm really happy with the design. I think it looks great, and it's also functional, meaning it's aimed towards selling, which is what the client wants. Let's make the footer. I want to start out with something that will sit above it. For that reason, I'll duplicate the email form that's in the hero area. Is this a bit aggressive by repeating all these calls to action? Yes, but ultimately they work, and since they're visually pleasing, I'm okay with that. All the inspirational sites were following this line too. So for this duplicate, we'll raise the opacity back to 100% and we'll change its colour to that bright red. The fields pop out immediately. The only thing we need to change is the download button. Here we'll invert the colours. We'll use yellow for the background layer and red for the actual text layer. I don't think we need the quote and arrow, so we're going to leave those out. This area is optional, but I think it's a good transition between the content area and the footer. Speaking of which, let's draw out a big rectangle. No particular size in mind because we're going to adjust it as we go along. I'm not going to use a simple dark grey, instead I'll use a pattern overlay from Subtle Patterns to give it a nice texture. Open up the extension window and browse around. After you've seen a few, choose one that seems appropriate. You don't want something that has a complicated pattern, you want something fairly neutral, and I think this one is our first option. Let's add some content in. Quick navigation is something pretty standard. Write that title in with Montserrat bold, 14 pixels, 36 pixel leading, all caps. I don't want to use white because that would stand out a bit too much. Instead, I'll use CA, 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 a very light grey. For the menu items, I'll use the ones from up top. Format them this way. All caps, Montserrat light, 14 pixels with 40 pixels leading. Based on the space this occupies, we'll resize our background layer. I want to duplicate this menu and move it to the right. The client says he wants several things on the page and easy navigation, so we'll make up some items like podcast, webinars, white papers, blog, schedule a lesson, and voice lessons. These aren't specifically requested, but they were mentioned in the brief and it helps us occupy the space better. On the right side of the footer, we'll have the following title, a word from Chuck Gilmore. Underneath that, we'll place some text I got from his other websites. This should be in Museo Slab 300, 13 pixel size, 26 pixels leading. That's 2 times line height and it's quite generous, but for this footer section it works well. Put his name underneath so it's clear this is a quote from the teacher. Underneath this area, write Keep Connected. Here we'll use some social icons that I found on flaticon.com. It makes sense to get your resources from the same place if you're going to credit the owner anyway. Resize them and position them nicely. I like to have it so they'll be aligned with the two menus on the left side. To finish it off, we're going to make a copy of that bird symbol and put it underneath this quote. It should be white, but this time the opacity should be only 3%. It's visible but not in your face. The same story throughout the site, which is perfect. Let's add the copyright, but first make a duplicate of the background layer. This should be a simple, darker colour than what we have up top. So something almost black. A stroke would separate it nicely too. So add a stroke effect, 1 pixel, white, with 8% opacity. Great, now in the left side write copyright at 2014, power to sing. This should be in Montserrat Regular, 12 pixels in size, white. And on the right, let's put company information, terms and conditions, and privacy policy. This is mainly to balance it out. Now it's the time to review everything and see if we've messed anything up. Control 0 makes the design fit your screen, which is a great way of seeing it together as a package. You can see the main menu and the region above the footer go together nicely. It seems consistent throughout. We could have made the header black, now considering everything. Maybe the microphone could have been replaced with a real picture if we look at all the other images. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with this as the first concept. Remember, we didn't create this design to win, even though that would have been nice. We did it as an exercise to put everything together in one chapter. If you want to see how I win contests like this, I recommend you watch my other course named Learn Photoshop, Web Design and Profitable Freelancing. In it, I take you through all the stages, and I show you how I interact with the client, how I interpret his feedback, and so on. During the course, I win $3,500, so it's as serious as it gets, plus it's 16 hours long. Okay, so this was the project. I hope you enjoyed the journey from start to finish. I tried to detail my workflow as much as possible and showcase various techniques. Just in case you were wondering, the client has yet to select a winner. He has over 190 entries, so as you'd imagine, this would have taken significantly longer to finish. What I did see is that other designers went for a blog layout and the client seemed to appreciate that better. Overall, I'm happy with this as the first concept, and I hope you've learnt something from it. Conclusions. Hello and welcome to this final video about this project. After a very long time, about 2 months, the client finally awarded his contest and I'd quickly like to make a few comments. This is the winning design. Let's take a good look at it from top to bottom. It's very interesting from several points of view. First of all, for those who have experience on 99 Designs, this is no surprise at all. The home page is very different from what we had imagined. I'd say it actually doesn't follow the brief, but again, that's not a surprise. Remember, I mentioned you shouldn't take the brief literally. This happens quite a lot. The client describes one thing, yet in the winning design it might have the complete opposite in it. To be fair, we didn't read every single message the client posted, but those were mini novels, so I have no regrets about it. Let's go through a few things. First, the logo. It seems the designer didn't opt to fully refresh it. I still think it should be updated, even though it doesn't look half bad here. Regarding the hero area, I'm not in love with it. I don't agree with the main headline. I think alternating normal with all caps is a bad idea. Please remember, we weren't emotionally invested in this contest, so this isn't me talking out of spite or anger. The hero image received an interesting treatment. I can't say I'm a fan, but it doesn't look bad either. There are a few contrast issues here and there, but overall nothing major. Regarding the opt-in, it seems we were on the right track with our email area. Only thing is, we shouldn't have had that Get Started button. So it seems the client only wanted visitors' names and emails. I find that odd. Maybe he didn't realise this mistake, because that's how I take it. Yet again, maybe he relies only on newsletters. It's also interesting that the designer didn't go for a phone number. I don't think it's okay to drop a conversion channel, but maybe the client was okay with that too. Moving down to the content area, this video is probably supposed to replace our USPs. While videos help conversion ratios, I don't think you should rely on them alone. As for the rest of this area, I have no idea how this is supposed to work. It seems the site will be able to record your voice, and then you have a questionnaire of 11 questions. I find this really odd, complicated, and very hard to implement. Again, I tip my hat off to the designer, yet I'm intrigued by both his and the client's choices. This will be a nightmare to implement, or at least as far as I know from my limited coding knowledge. This section underneath is interesting, and I probably wouldn't have thought of that. Though again, does it really help users make up their mind? I'd rather see more about the teacher, his experience, the way he plans to teach, more hands-on aspects, but maybe that's reserved for other pages. The testimonial section looks great though, and I think toe for toe it's better looking than ours. The footer is pretty good too, though I'd probably make a couple of changes here and there. Overall, this is a good-looking design with a few problematic areas. The designer did a pretty good job. I would have liked to see another font used along with this serif one, a less complicated recording area, and a bit more attention to detail. Lastly, I'd like to point out that the winner didn't go for a blog layout either, even though the client asked for that strongly through his inspirational websites. If I were to redo this project, I would focus more on the testimonial and footer section. I would probably add 2 more sections along with those 3 we made, and I would change the header to a neutral colour. You always have to learn from your projects, but you should never regret your decisions. Move on to the next one with more passion and commitment. Okay, thanks for watching, and I hope you had fun and learned a few things. Flat design, definition, examples, flat animations, history, skeuomorphism, and more. Flat design can't be left out of this course because it seems to be just about everywhere these days. You can't mention web design without somebody shouting out flat design before you finish your sentence. It's that big of a deal. What is flat design? Flat design refers to a style where design elements are simple, orientated towards functionality, where drop shadows, gradients, and layer styles in general aren't used. It has a crisp feeling and it's usually 2D. It's a take on minimalistic design but with a twist. In general, it features big sans serif fonts, flat custom graphics, generous spacings, and a colour scheme that's based on big contrasts. Let's take a look at a few examples, even though I'm sure you're quite familiar with it. CaramelBudgie.com. As you can see, this follows all the rules. We have a big sans serif headline, several illustrations made in the same flat style, and faded pink, I'd say, for the background. Notice the cream desk too. There's no wood pattern on it, no shadows, no extra details. Also, there's a lot of space between each section of the website to convey a feeling of openness. The icons in this section follow the exact same design principles as the ones up top. Speaking of which, let's go back to the hero section. I want to tackle this potential question from the get-go. I said there are no gradients, drop shadows, or layer styles in general. But if we take a look at the lamp, we'll see... well, it's not a shadow per se, but it's a light emitted from the lamp. An even better example is the shelf, which clearly has several shadows on the edges. So which is it, with or without shadows? The answer is this. Shadows like the one you see here are fine, drop shadows aren't. So if you were to take this element and put a default drop shadow from the Layer Styles panel, it would definitely break this design style. With that out of the way, let's see another example. alchemy-digital.co.uk. This is a prime case of flat design. It's a beautiful website that shows us flat design doesn't have to be boring, pale or faded. Those are things that people whisper around corners, by the way. With the use of strong custom graphics and big contrasts, you get an immediate reaction from the user. Great font use in the headline and sub-headline, the suits are great, and while we move along we see each section looks lovely. Yellow background, black text, it works brilliantly here. Underneath we have the same situation, a type of red background with black text over it. It creates a big impact, it's very easy to read, and it gets the point across. This is the essence of flat design. It conveys the message without any hesitations, without any distractions or unnecessary decorations. It's a strong design style that surely has its place in modern web design. Let's also notice the animation in this site. This is a technique designers are using more and more to stand out from the crowd. Flat design loves movement, it makes the whole site feel alive. We can refresh the site to see the suits in the hero area move. Or we can just scroll over to this digital strategy section and we can see the solution bubbling. This is great, it really is, because it adds so much personality and it makes the site memorable. Unfortunately, we can't represent any movement in our designs without doing some extra work. The idea is you can use the animation panel in Photoshop and then save your file as a GIF. This way, both the coder and the client can better see your ideas without having them imagine it. I won't be covering animation work in Photoshop because it's not the object of this course, but it's something you may want to consider down the road. If you're familiar with the Adobe suite, you probably know that Photoshop isn't the best tool for animating things. You're much better off using After Effects, yet the animation panel still does a pretty good job for basic stuff. Animation keeps people engaged with the website. When they see a button shaking for a few seconds before settling into place, it really impresses them. I think it brings the inner child out of us. People enjoy flat animations because most of them are quite simple. That's not to say they're crude, on the contrary. Most of them are quite refined, yet the particular color scheme you have to use makes the end result look playful and friendly. And at any time you can connect to your user where you can generate an emotional response. Well, that's going to be great for that website. I'd also like to point out that we're out of the Stone Age web design-wise. CSS3 is great for animating things, even if you simply use transitions. It's also supported by most browsers out there with very few exceptions. Also, the W3C just fully embraced HTML5. This happened on the 28th of October 2014, so things are moving along. I know this has less to do with Photoshop, and I'm not that passionate about coding either, but it's definitely something you should write down on your to-do list: flat animations and the means to achieve it. Okay, another factor that contributed to its booming success is the fact that it goes hand in hand with responsive design. It's far easier to make a flat design work well on any resolution. As you're probably aware, certain design elements, say an icon with loads of realistic details, shadows, lighting effects, the works, doesn't scale well when you resize it. It requires significantly more effort on both parts for the designer and the coder. By stripping all that away, we end up with something far easier to work with. So, by having a streamlined workflow, more and more people could get into coding and subsequently responsive design. It also helps load things faster, since most flat sites aren't as resource-heavy as regular websites. You can control lots of aspects of the design by using pure CSS code. The difference is night and day, and there are statistics that show us flat design equals in faster loading speeds. How did flat design come up? Design trends come and go. That's the first thing you already know from the fashion industry. I won't get into details because they won't help you design better. What you do need to know is that Windows made it mainstream with the Metro interface. Not everybody loved it, but lots of people took notice of it. Apple pushed it through in iOS 7 and basically forced users to like it with their new interface. It was highly discussed, and big designers shook their head in disappointment upon seeing the reinvented iPhone interface under flat design. Nowadays, people have accepted it for the most part, yet both users and designers still crave what we had before. And that was skeuomorphic design. A bit hard to pronounce, but the idea was simple: create everything as realistic as possible. So if you had a voice recording app, you'd create a big, shiny, highly detailed microphone that looked like the real deal. You had a stats app, you create a realistic dial icon, and you'd spend hours trying to get the lighting right. A lot of people feel we're missing out. But flat isn't the default go-to style. It's an option you can take or leave it on the table. Clients are asking for it, but I don't think it's the established route. Not yet. I believe some sites or businesses are better suited to use this particular style. Others are difficult to pull off. So don't try to become a flat specialist in order to get ahead. I don't think it's something you should bet your house on. I'm talking about normal websites. For mobile sites, it's a different thing, but we'll get into that too. So skeuomorphism is very much in style if you manage to pull it off. You won't see too many clients turn down amazing designs like the ones you see on the screen right now. But these take a world of effort, and if you don't know how to manage your business relationship with your client, you might be in for a lot of extra work. I believe this is one of the problems regarding flat design. Previously, we, as designers, all looked at designs like this and we considered them our final destination, our source of inspiration. We worked on our skills so we could produce something in the same region of quality. That took years of hard work. Now I'm afraid designers might lose focus and subsequently practice skeuomorphism less. It's still early to sound the alarm, yet from my point of view that's one of the things we need to look out for. My suggestion is you keep working on those shiny microphones. Flat design is a style you have to understand and be able to execute correctly. And that's what we're going to focus on. And I'd like to point out again that flat design makes things easier. Unless you're a veteran designer, it's probably not likely you can execute custom graphics that look like this. The amount of skill required is huge. With flat design, you can break everything down to simple shapes. Just look at the first site we saw. Almost everything there is either a rectangle, a circle, or a line. This makes it much more approachable for us to create a great-looking design like Alchemy Digital. Break things down into simple shapes, put enough time and effort into it, and you'll get there. Lastly, I want to point out that Android L is going for something that's called material design. From the looks of it, it's going to be a variation on flat design. This is great for users because it simplifies and significantly improves user experience on mobile devices. Depending on when you watch this course, you might see material design live on your Android phone, or you can take a look at this presentation they have up and running. From a graphical standpoint, I absolutely love it, and it seems to fit apps like a glove. I believe this is where this style truly shines, and this is something you can get really excited for. I've been working on Android apps for quite a few years, and from what I've seen live so far, the design is great, lovely on the eye and easy to use. Flat design was a natural move from Web 2.0. Material design is just a step away from flat. So in the design world, things are moving along, and I believe this is a great time to jump on this design train. There are lots of opportunities and lots of things you can specialize in. Okay, enough about that. Let's go over some things you have to look out for in flat design. Avoid these flat design mistakes. I'm going to run you through some of the most common mistakes when dealing with flat design. After we get these out of the way, we can then focus on how you actually design a flat website. 1. Don't oversimplify. Everybody understands flat means simple, but don't take it too far. Your design still has to be visually appealing, and it has to have that hook that steals the user's attention. The problem deepens when you realize most sites follow the same structure and pretty much the same color scheme. This makes it harder to stand out. This is why your typography game has to be on point. This is why adequate spacing is essential. And your custom graphics, well, you really have to nail them. Go big or go home. Like I previously mentioned, flat design is easier in general, but that doesn't mean you can be lazy about it. For example, lots of users oversimplify their calls to action. Get a rectangle, slap some text on it, and there you go. Hey, it's flat, right? Indeed, you have to maintain a certain simplicity, but if you're designing a presentation site, you have to think about how you're going to create a lasting impression on the user. Imagine someone is browsing for a particular service or product. They open up 3 to 5 websites and yours is one of them. How can you present a strong punchline while using flat design? Alchemy Digital, the site we just saw, has the answer. Big, bold, and unapologetic. And that's what you should focus on. Keep in mind that as you strip away design tricks and techniques, you get less room for error. If you don't know how to mix and match your fonts in a regular website, you might be able to hide it in a sea of bling and embellishments. In flat style, well, there's nothing to hide behind. Any flaw in your design game will immediately be spotted. So by having less elements, you need to have stronger ones. 2. Don't neglect calls to action. With flat websites having so many colours, it's pretty hard to stand out as a mere rectangle. And this is something people are complaining about. Since we're using colours in our custom graphics, our backgrounds and even our typography, your calls to action don't get noticed. This frustrates the user because he's no longer sure where he can click. You have to keep that in mind and compensate for it. Using generous proportions is one of the ways you can guide the user visually. Arrows and other details that draw his attention are optional in most cases, but sometimes they are dearly needed. Black and white can be another solution for too much colour. How's that? Well, again, we're going to look at alchemy, and we can see how the white buttons stand out so much. The fade out when you hover over it helps too, but that's a bit harder to represent in Photoshop. The idea is, even if the user goes over it by mistake, he's sure to notice it. It does its job very well as a call to action. So to wrap up this point, make sure you don't forget one of the most important things when designing a website, and that is to direct the user to perform some type of action. 3. Be consistent. Inspired by some nice freebies they saw on Dribbble, designers sometimes create a hodgepodge of styles. When you decide to go flat, you need to do it from top to bottom. You can't have just a flat hero area, or just flat buttons. And believe me, I've seen cases where people were confidently explaining that only the buttons were flat. They were actually under-designed, nothing more to it. A flat website must create an atmosphere by using small principles that add up into one big impression. We've seen a faded blue background with a big sans serif font a million times. Why would it be different? When you extract it from the package, it's bland and boring. When everything else is in line, built around it, then you get it right. So before you use any flat iPhones in your hero area, double check to see if it fits the entire design. Consistency is the foundation of a flat website. Without it, we just have a beginner designer who doesn't know what he's doing. 4. Be creative. I mentioned earlier that some people whisper around the corners that flat design is terrible. It's predictable, it's passé, and it's just a trend that will go away in a matter of months. Well, they have a point. It's easier to create cookie-cutter designs, websites that don't feel special at all. Sure, if you follow the rules, you'll get a decent website, but I believe it's easier to create a mediocre flat design than a mediocre regular design, so to speak. I think people are using this design style in an odd way. They limit their creativity because, oh my goodness, we couldn't possibly add a subtle pattern to the background now, could we? That's not in the rules. The rules, that's not flat. You know what? Who the hell cares? You have to be creative. You have to design something amazing, something that people will love. It doesn't matter what label you put on it. If it looks great, then it doesn't matter if it's parallax, minimalistic, theme-based, flat, Web 2.0, corporate, grunge, or whatever. The so-called rules are there so beginners can have a guideline, so they can color between the lines and still get a decent result. If you want to be remarkable, you'll have to master the basics, build yourself a solid foundation, and then throw the rules out of the window. So to sum up this point, be creative. Don't let certain rules limit your designing. Don't create a hodgepodge of styles either, but when in doubt, see what the entire design looks like as a whole. Building a flat website introduction. In this section of the course, I'll show you how to create a simple presentation site by using flat design. I'm going to focus on the main concepts of this style, how to get a color scheme going, and the principles behind everything. I won't be focusing too much on hotkeys or describing how I sort my layers and things of that nature, since we already have a full hands-on project in another part of this course. So I'm going to run through this fairly quickly because I don't expect you to follow along as I'm working. You should try to understand the concepts and see how I analyze things. Okay, let's get started with the project details. The company is called Wired Av, and it's a web and mobile development firm. It's an old project from 99 Designs, but it can help us explore flat design. First of all, since they're a web development company and they want a flat design, I immediately have a sense of how the site should look. This is the trap I was telling you about earlier when I said designs are predictable. For demonstration purposes, though, this will be all right. We surely need a hero area that describes the company's mission and something to showcase their completed projects. Calls to action must be obvious as well as their services. Customer testimonials should be included too, and with that, we have a pretty solid structure. It's up to us to make it interesting and exciting because the layout won't be anything to shout out for. I'll do my best while still moving through the project quite fast, so let's jump right into it and get going. Building a flat website, setting the foundation. Let's open up the 960 grid system and lock our guides for starters. I no longer have the original logo, but I only adjusted the color scheme. I have a pretty clear idea in my mind, so for that I made a selection of wired and made it white from black. For AV and their symbol, I did the same thing, only I went for a pale green. Now, how do you set up your color scheme for a flat design so everything looks perfect? Well, one of the best places to get started is flatUIcolors.com. Simply click on the color and you'll have its color code. Make sure you select hex, but without the hashtag symbol, so you can paste it straight away into Photoshop. As you can see, you have a wide selection of choices, but without it being overwhelming. Once you have something you like, it's easy to select various colors that go with it. But say you're not keen on the particular color you've selected here, but don't want to go back and forth several times. I like to do the following to avoid that. Make a large rectangle that will act as our background for the hero area. Then double-click on its thumbnail to open up the color picker. Paste a flat color you got from the site, and then to get more options, simply move up or down in this area. This way you'll get the same saturation and brightness values, which will ensure your color will be in that same space. Other flat color options are flatUIcolorpicker.com or Adobe Cooler. I recommend you start from one of them and then make up your own colors. You don't want the same background color for your hero area as thousands of other designers. This is what I meant when I said some flat designs tend to look the same, because a lot of people use these exact color codes and the very layouts. Okay, let's get started with our header. We already have our logo placed in the top left. Now we need a background for it. We'll get the rectangle tool and draw one as wide as the canvas and with a height of, say, 80 pixels. The measurements don't have to be exact, but I'm mentioning them so you have an idea regarding proportions. After I draw rectangles like this, I always like to position them precisely with the alignment tools. So press Ctrl A and then align horizontal centers and align top edges. Great. For the color, I'll use 2C 3D63, which is a variation from a flat color I got from flatUIcolors.com. It's a fairly dark blue, and once you see the logo over it, you'll see it looks quite nice. This is why I went for that pale green. Center the logo vertically, and we're good to go. For the menu, I already have something prepared. Home, About Us, Services, Portfolio, Contact Us, so I'll paste it in. Font-wise, I'll go with something modern that fits this type of website perfectly. My choice is Roboto Condensed, all caps, white, 14 pixels, and in this particular case, since I don't have medium or bold for my weight, I'll set anti-aliasing to strong. Center that too. Just a quick tip. In case you want to center a big tall object to this background and you don't want that to move, you can always do it like this. Control-click the thumbnail to make a selection and then use the alignment tools. This way you're certain your background layer won't move. Alternatively, you can use the marquee to make a selection and then use the tools up top. Right, let's continue. Speaking about right, we'll add 2 call to action buttons in our header menu. Get the rounded rectangle tool and draw a button that's 100 pixels wide and 40 pixels tall. Give or take, of course. Color-wise, we need something to stand out. We could use that green, but since we're going to have 2 buttons, I'll keep that one for the other button. So for the first one, we'll use E7 4C 3C. For the text inside, we can duplicate our menu text layer so we'll have the exact formatting. Replace it with Get Quote and center it. Leave enough room between the last menu item and this button. We don't want things crowded. 20 to 40 pixels will do just fine. Duplicate this button and change the text to Live Chat. Here we're going to use the green from the logo. Align it correctly. Now leave 10 empty pixels between the two buttons and make sure the entire thing is right aligned. Take a few moments to observe our progress so far. I find using full screen mode is always great because it also centers the design on your screen and it removes all distractions. I don't need to mention that your layers panel should be impeccable, that's a given. Okay, so I'd like to do one more thing before we move on. Select Home and make it a different color so we can show we're currently on the home page. I like to sample the background color and then move up and to the left until I get something I like. D1, DD, F6 is what I'm going to use. Now go to Icon Finder and look for Cursor. By the way, Icon Finder has gone down big time since they decided to push for premium icons. I mean, $1 for an icon is huge. There are stock photos out there for $1. The site isn't what it used to be. Anyway, download this cursor hand and drag it into our project. We want to show what happens when you hover over a menu item, say Services. So we're going to make that green. This is great for both the client and the coder, but unfortunately sometimes by showing these states the design gets a bit busy, or better put, less clean since we have various colors. This is not the case here, but when you have drop-down menus that hide parts of the hero area, when you have a grid of services that's 4 by 2 all in the same color except one, that's when these will drag the initial impression down. That's why I recommend you always send 2 screenshots to your client, a normal one without all the hover states and another one to showcase them. With that said, this section is complete and now we can move down. Building a flat website, creating the central point. Okay, we already have our header, now it's time to focus on the hero area and the section underneath it. The central point of the site, if you will. First, get the rectangle and create the background. Be generous with its size. 700 pixels or so in height should be great. Align it correctly, and then for the color, we'll use 597AC6. This is a lighter blue than the one up top, and it'll give us great contrast. You really have to keep that in mind when designing because some colors don't work well with white text. As you previously saw, Alchemy used black text, but in general I'd say it's better to stick to white. Let's write world-class web and mobile solutions for the main headline. This should be centered on the canvas. For its formatting, we'll use Roboto Condensed, Bold, 50 pixels, all caps, smooth anti-aliasing. For the subheadline, I already have a bit of text prepared in my notepad. Again, I'm preparing everything beforehand, so we keep this section short and sweet. The text isn't fabulous, but it'll have to do. This should be Roboto Condensed Light, 24 pixels, without the all caps. Make sure you center the text on the canvas, but you also center it as it is. Remember, we want good spacing all around, so be generous with it. I won't go too crazy, so we'll leave 50 pixels from the header to the main headline. And from that to our subheadline, we'll have 30 pixels. Great, now underneath we'll place a nice mock-up with a Mac and iPhone. I'm not an Apple fan, but these have become the norm when it comes down to showing off your work. A good place to get flat freebies is Pixden.com. I already have this opened and this is free to download and free to use. If you're interested in premium materials, you need to pay $6 per month to access them all. I had a subscription and I have to say it's well worth it. I already have these prepared in another tab, so let me just drag them into position. I'll leave 30 pixels from the sub-headline to the Mac. These are great because they're smart objects. If you select the screen layer, you'll see it's named Put Your Design Here. This means that if you double-click it, you'll open up another tab that has the extension PSB. That's not PSD, but PSB. Here you can make any adjustments, drag in your screenshots, hit Ctrl+S to save, and we're great. The changes appear in our main project. This area is pretty much done. Optionally, we can add arrows to control the screenshots presented. Or we can put real images instead of these "put your design here." For this tutorial, we'll leave it like that, even though it won't look as good. Those are finishing touches we don't need to deal with. Take a moment to clean things up and make sure everything's spot on. Next, we're going to focus on this sub-hero section. I already have something prepared, so let's jump to it. First, we'll use another big title. Wired Avenue is the new standard in web and mobile development. Wired Av is short for Wired Avenue. Not sure if that's right, but that was their logo. Center it on the screen and use Roboto Condensed Bold 39 pixels. This will make the text occupy the entire active content area. Color-wise, we'll use 333 for Wired Avenue is the, and the rest of it is going to be in that background blue. This is to add a little something extra to it. Regarding the spacing, I'll leave 50 empty pixels. For the subheadline, we can duplicate the one from the hero area. Replace it with lorem ipsum though. You should have 1 3/4 lines of text. It would have been better to write in some real text, but we're compromising here since this isn't going to be sent to a real client. Turn down the size to 16 pixels and change the color to 333. This is going to be used throughout the site. So we've set things up quite nicely. The region underneath will hold their services. Since we need some color and some zing in our design, I've looked for some nice colorful icons. These are from webdesingerdepot.com, and you can find them by searching 12 flat SEO icons. These were made by designer Vladislav Karpov. I already have these prepared in another tab. I selected 6 of the group that would best represent the services of the company. So let's get started. I want 2 columns, 3 rows. To create the columns, let's assume we don't have the grid system in place, we don't have these columns, all we have are the outer guides, right? Here's what you can do if you find yourself in a situation like this. Get the rectangle tool and drag until somewhere near the middle. It doesn't have to be exact. Then duplicate it and move it to its right until it touches the initial shape. Now decide how much space you want between the two. Let's say 20 pixels. Okay, now most likely it won't fit our active area correctly, so what you need to do is select both of them and drag until the right shape hits and touches the guide. And that's it, now they fit right. If you're using CS6 and you want rounded corners, you will now need to look at the width and then recreate the shape, but with a rounded rectangle. Here we can just use the Live Shape Properties panel and set the radius to 5 pixels. The height should be around 140 to 160. Let's settle for 150 pixels. For the color, I'll use something very light and pale. 1DBB90 is my exact code. This is because we'll have a dash of color from the icons, so there's no need to overdo it. Let's drag in the first one, the pen. Center it vertically. After that, measure the distance from the top and bottom so we can have it the same for the left side. Take your time with it to make sure it looks right. Next, let's write in the service name. Here it's going to be Website Design. Roboto Condensed, Bold, 20 pixels, 333. Classic. Leave about 30 pixels from the icon, and we don't want to align it at the top. Leave a few pixels there. Now let's add some dummy text. 2.5 lines, but this time we'll use Roboto, the regular version, not the condensed one. For its size, we'll use 13 pixels. Regarding its color, we'll use 555 instead of 333 because I don't want it that strong. Arrange everything and make sure you trim any excess text. I don't recommend you keep any extra space in your text layers because that will mess with your alignment. Once you eliminate it, you can group these 2 text layers and center them with the background. Then we ungroup, group everything together, rename, and we have our first one done. Now I'll ask for your forgiveness once again, but I will speed up the video quite a bit in order to zoom through these 5 regions. I'm going to do the exact same things and I don't want to bore you with the details. In general, I like to diversify both the headline and text layers, but in this case I'll make an exception. I'll just change each service name because that's mandatory. In total, we're going to have website design, internet marketing, web development, training and webinars, mobile development, identity and branding. These are all services the company offers, so it wouldn't be a good idea to leave dummy text here. Furthermore, I'd like to point out that in some cases the company might offer 7 services. That would completely change this structure. We can't have a 7th one in the center of them underneath. It wouldn't look right. In these cases, I recommend you remove the one that seems less important. Or, as an alternative, you can replace the last headline with Other Services, and in the description underneath you can mention the ones you couldn't include. Okay, so this area is done, and so is the hero section. Overall, we've done great progress in a short amount of time. We have a few other sections to tend to, so let's get started on those too. Building a flat website, testimonials and CTAs. In this video, we'll focus on creating the customer testimonial section, and we'll add a call to action area. In general, testimonials are very important towards establishing trust in the user's eyes. Most people often check reviews before purchasing a product or service, no matter the price range. That's why I consider these sections critical. Flat design doesn't have too much to say since this is mostly about the actual quote. Any design that's around this section must be minimal and it shouldn't interfere with the actual content. Here, in our case, I'll use images of people because this is a great way to A. get the message across and B. improve the aesthetics of the region. So let's go for it. First, the title. We can duplicate the one on top and drag it down. Let's write Read Real Customer Testimonials and we'll use the same two-toned approach as before. 50 pixels should give us enough breathing room. We're going to use circles to hold our images, so let's add them. Get the ellipse tool and draw a 130 pixel circle. Duplicate until you have 5 of them. Select them all and distribute them. Now for the one in the center, you can use Ctrl-T and Alt and Shift when you're enlarging it. Of course, this will make circle 2 and 4 seem out of place. Get the marquee tool, make a selection between the 2 circles, and then use the alignment tools up top. Great, one last step to do. Align the bottom edges for all of them. I prefer to have it this way because underneath we'll have the company logo. Okay, I already have a few images pre-selected. You can use pixabay.com if you're looking for some. They have a few photos that you can use, or you can browse any other website that's in the list attached to the course for free images. In general though, these close-up ones are harder to find. Still, you can always use Google for the initial mock-up. I like to use celebrities because it makes it very obvious that those are for presentation purposes only. So even though I said you should stay away from Google, this is one of the very few exceptions. And just in case the client isn't too happy about showing his face, assure him that it's well worth it. Images help build trust, and on top of that, you can help him look good through a bit of Photoshop. You don't have to be a retouching expert to improve a photo. In most cases, if you simply have them all in black and white, they'll look better. But you can spend a few minutes to eliminate dark points, blemishes, improve lighting, shadows, saturation. It sounds like a lot of work, but it actually only takes a few minutes. I have free videos on my YouTube channel that show you how to improve your photos. Go check that out. Okay, enough about that. Let's finish up this area. Underneath each image, we'll add a company logo. That's far more important since they're in the business of creating other businesses. Their name will be placed in the actual quote. I'll speed up this area as well because it's repetitive work. Same actions, nothing too fancy. Alright, now we have our lovely faces in place. Let me show you how you can make these 4 small images black and white while the main one remains in colour. There are a number of ways to do this, but I'll show you how to do it with an adjustment layer and a mask. First, make a selection with the Marquee tool. Get all of the circles, including the big one. Leave the logos out of it. Now go to the Layers panel and add an adjustment layer called Black and White. OK, great. Now the entire selection is desaturated. Go to that layer and select the mask. Make sure you have it active by switching over a few times. You'll see these corner lines move. Now get the brush tool, make it pretty big, and while having black as your foreground colour, you need to paint over the central image. Now it's coloured again. Alternatively, you can use the elliptical Marquee tool and make a selection. After that, use Alt-Delete. You'll get the same thing. Or use Shift F5 and black. Or, and I promise this is the final one, you can do this. Go back to the rectangular Marquee tool, make a selection for the first two circles, then hold Shift to add that selection. Now add the black and white adjustment layer. And only the ones selected will be desaturated. OK, enough about that. I thought it might be of interest for some of you since many testimonial sections are initially black and white until you hover over them. Now for the actual text, we can duplicate the sub-headline from up top. To better delineate this section, we'll use two grey lines. We'll use the Line tool for that. So with the help of the guides, we'll drag a line from the outer left guide near the middle of the canvas. It doesn't have to be spot on because we'll adjust it later on anyway. Now drag another line down and make sure it touches the initial one. Now back up, and then duplicate the first line. So in total we should have 4 layers. Now select them and merge. I prefer to do it this way rather than holding the Shift while I go along because it's easier to make adjustments. Speaking of which, we have to make sure this region is in the centre of the canvas. For that, we'll focus on the middle circle, and we can see 3 guides are going through the middle of it. That's where our point should be. Get the Direct Selection tool and move it into place. These little things, I wouldn't even call them tricks, are very much needed to create shapes like this. Otherwise you'll get yourself frustrated fast. Anyway, now it's looking pretty good. All we have to do is add another line underneath, this time a straight one. Make sure you adjust your spacings. And that's it. This area is done. Underneath, we'll add a third line where we'll write Christina Smithson, approve. Make sure you adjust your spacings. Underneath, we'll add another title, Contact Us and Let's Get Started. Make a duplicate from the one up top. Here we'll have massive call to action buttons. Generous in proportions, let's call them plus size buttons to be politically correct. Let's add a rounded rectangle that's 250 by 80 and make it that red we used up top. Inside, write the same thing, get quote. Duplicate it, make it green, and write live chat. These will basically end the site. Underneath we'll have the footer, but I wanted to showcase strong calls to action before that. Centre them accordingly. group and center them on the canvas. And we're done with this region. Like I mentioned, we won't be adding any other sections even though it would be appropriate. I think for presentation purposes this serves its goal, so we'll jump to the next video to finish the footer and with it the entire project. Building a flat website, finishing up with the footer. So we're near the end of the project. That means we have to create the footer. So let's jump on it even though it's quite repetitive stuff. First, I want to add a band of logos that represent companies that have endorsed Wired Avenue. These are fake, of course, but this technique has its place in modern web design. It's a way of showcasing more companies without crowding the testimonial section. So let's get the rectangle tool and draw one that's about 75 pixels tall. Color-wise, we'll use 304574. I have my logos selected. I've made them white with the help of some nice selection work and a color overlay. This is sometimes tricky to do because some clients don't have their logo in a PNG or vector format. Okay, all that's left is to align them correctly. Great. Job well done. Underneath we'll have another rectangle, this time bigger, that will hold all our content. 400 pixels in height. And for the color code we'll have 2C3D63. In it we'll have 4 sections: About Us, Quick Links, Services, and Keep Connected. Write those in separate text layers. For the formatting we'll use Roboto Condensed Bold, 16 pixels, white in all caps. This is so the text mirrors the header and the hero area, where we used all caps as well. Alright, now for the About Us section, things are very straightforward. We can paste in lorem ipsum, format it, and space. It doesn't have to be too fancy. The font is going to be Roboto Light, 12 pixels with 24 pixel line height, white with anti-aliasing set on strong. Make sure you have 2 paragraphs and each of them has about 4 lines. Next we have Quick Links. Here we'll use the same font as was the case for About Us. We'll write Home, About Us, Services, Portfolio, Contact Us, and Team Members. We want the menu items to be similar in height as the description on the left, so for that we'll up the line height to 30 pixels. The Services section is very much similar. We'll duplicate the menu we just added and we'll replace it with real services the company offers. I already have the list in my notepad prepared, so I'll paste it in. For the Keep Connected section, we'll have 4 social media icons in white. This is so we don't get any color clashes and to continue the flat style we used throughout. I have them ready, so I'll just position them correctly. And we're great. We'll paste a fake address and some company information because this usually sits in the footer. For the email, we'll change its color to the green we use throughout the site to show that it's a link. Now, of course, we have to spend a few minutes to make sure each section has enough room on all sides. When something isn't properly spaced, it creates a sensation of something being off, even though you may not immediately notice it or put your finger on it. So spend some time on that and don't rush, even though this is the footer and you want to get the job finished. Okay, finally another rectangle at the bottom. "50 pixels in height with the following color code, 233356. Write in copyright at 2014, even though you may be watching this in 2015 or 16, wiredavenue.com. And that's a wrap. Go into full screen mode to observe the overall layout and feel. You can use Ctrl-0 to make the design fit your screen. As you can see, it's consistent throughout, and even though we skipped a section or two for the sake of speed, I'm still very happy with how it looks.